Great. Okay, thank you everyone for joining us for our for our bicycle advocacy workshop session. Today, we will begin the session again with a group of experienced panelists, Aaron Skabeland of BYU and a longstanding member of Bike Walk Provo, Becca Rolfe, Salt Lake City Transportation, Councilwoman Danielle Larkin of St. George and Southern Utah Bicycle Association, and Adon Carrillo of Rio Tinto and the Bicycle Collective. We will have a Q&A session after the panelists have finished presenting. Then we will head into small group sessions in the workshop format. Aaron, would you like to start us off?
Sure, I'd be glad to. So I'm speaking from my experiences based on about 12 years of advocacy with Bike Walk Provo, and you'll notice I've got the uniform on today. And also as an academic professional historian, I teach at BYU, so you'll notice that I'll repeatedly invoke history in my introductory comments. And this is based on my experience working with city, regional, and state officials, both elected and non-elected officials. And I'll try to, in my opening comments, just mention a few concrete examples, even at the risk that perhaps some of my interlocutors might be tuning in, and I might be giving away my secret sauce. So 3 things that I see as key to keep bicycle advocacy conversations moving forward. So first, build relations, build solid relationships. Ideally, my goal here in Provo and beyond is to have our elected and non-elected officials be so gung-ho about active transportation that that they put me out of business, that I no longer need to do this. But in the meantime, these are the people that I need to work with. And in Provo, to be frank, we've long kind of been frustrated with our elected officials who talk the talk, but in many ways don't really walk the walk. That is, they don't make the kind of hard structural and personnel and policy changes to really move things forward or make that movement go forward much more quickly. And this is the case for many of the city employees as well. Some of them were not even talking the talk, or they were talking the talk of the last auto-centric 20th century. But even then, despite those challenges, we were able to get some things done. And the key to that, I think, was to build relationships, even with people who we weren't really on the same page as. Lately, we've seen some turnover and some new blood within our public works department, and in a number of ways, the logjam seems to be breaking. That said, we recently did something kind of edgy, some tactical urbanism that wasn't sanctioned by the city. We put down some bike markers that had ponytails on them to make clear that we wanted our cities to be safe for everybody, not just kind of grouchy middle-aged men like myself. And we were stopped by the police, and we took responsibility. And I was worried that this might kind of test our relationship, but because we had a good relationship with the city, with certain people within the police department and within public works, we took responsibility for what we did, and everything's just fine, and things continue to move forward. So my second point is related to this. We need to practice patience and persistence. And when I say persistence, I mean pressure. Government moves slowly. It needs to be pushed by us in the advocacy field while we maintain or try to maintain patience. We did not create this auto-centric transportation world that we live in overnight. It's in many ways a product of history, and it's going to take time and a lot of effort to overcome that past and to make things better in the future. And my third point is that showing up is 80%, if not more. So it's often said that the squeaky wheel gets the oil. Bureaucracies are inherently conservative and risk adverse, but you need to show up so many times and be persistent and patient, so that the people that you're dealing with in these government agencies will become risk adverse to upsetting you, and they'll respect you because you have a relationship with you, but they'll also not want to disappoint you. So I really believe that what we are advocating for, what we're arguing for, is best, and not just for us, but for our communities as a whole, including and especially those who do not have a voice and have limited choices about how they move around. So history is on our side, and I am confident that elected officials and policymakers are coming along and will come to recognize that. But they too are up against forces that resist change and like the autocentric status quo. And hopefully, and I'm confident that we can help them develop cultures of innovation and change to overcome this resistance and hopefully someday put us out of business. Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. Becca, you want to go next? I think you're on mute, Becca.
Thank you. I rarely mute myself, and so then when I do, I sometimes forget. Thank you. Becca Rolfe, I work for Salt Lake City Transportation Division. I've worked there for a little over 11 years. I moved to Utah specifically for the job to become what was sometimes known at the time, at least, as an advocate on the inside. I had formerly been a bicycle advocate professionally. I was the director of the Vermont Bicycle and Pedestrian Coalition in Vermont prior to moving to Utah. And before that, I had served as the director of the Alliance for Transportation Choice in Portland, Maine, the other Portland, which I actually prefer, and also has some great bike stuff. And then took this position with Salt Lake City Transportation at a time when the political climate was very supportive of increased bicycle facilities in particular. And under the administration of Ralph Becker as mayor, was basically asked to do like more bike infrastructure as fast as I possibly could. And so that was my charge. I was being evaluated based on the number of miles of bike lanes that we produced every year. I developed a system of getting in on all of the surface treatments that the city was doing, so that anytime that we did a chip seal or a slurry seal or anything, I was trying to be there, pushing along to get a different striping plan put in as a follow-up to that surface treatment than what had been there before, carving out space for bikes. Eventually, as with many cities, we experienced some bike lash. That is, we had prioritized, for some people, too much space for bikes. And so I think that that's one of the perspectives that I have as having been an advocate and then serving in government, is that on any project that the city staff is doing, there are going to be people who hate. And if the people who love it don't say that they love it and say that they love it, I mean, I really appreciate whenever you tell me that you love what I'm doing, but I need you to tell the mayor. I need you to tell the city council, because they are the ones that hear from the people who don't love it. And so, you know, that's my perspective. The other thing is, for me, I was doing literally everything I could as fast as I could. So there are human limits when it comes to patience. There are human limits to how much your staff can accomplish. And if you are seeing tremendous progress on some key projects, you maybe can't expect to have progress on all things simultaneously. There is still humanity, there is still bandwidth And even as the city staff is very supportive, and you will see that my profile picture for this summit is me with like snow plastered over me while I'm out riding my bike, because I was checking in the middle of a winter snowstorm to see how the bike lane plowing was going. So like, don't presume that you are always like the harder core, like person who has the perspective on how bikes work and that your city staff doesn't. It really depends on the person. So, you know, I'm the one I've been a winter bike commuter for like 25 years or somewhere in that neighborhood. I've lost track. So, you know, I'm out there doing it, seeing it, being part of it, but I still have the limitations of I'm only one person. And so rather than ankle biting me sometimes, it's really helpful if you understand that I have to have priorities. And so if I've said like this thing is a priority, and right now we're going to work on the bike infrastructure that will allow the people with ponytails to ride, then we can't necessarily accomplish everything simultaneously, and that maybe needs to be the priority for the staff. So I think that's some of the perspective that I bring from having been on both sides, from having been an advocate and also being now involved in city government and trying to make things happen from that side.
Great thoughts. Thank you, Becca. Danielle, can you go next?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Becca and Aaron shared a lot of my thoughts, so I'm thinking that what I will share with you is some additional maybe examples from Southern Utah of how what they've shared can be implemented. First of all, listening to Aaron and him talking about communication and relationship building, for me, that's really where it's at. In Southern Utah, the first example of that was really the Southern Utah Bicycle Alliance, which at the time when they began that relationship building, I wasn't part of the alliance. I am now on the board. But the Southern Utah Bicycle Alliance was started by John Reed, who many of you may know because he's on the Bike Utah board, Craig Shanklin, Ryan Gurr, who owns Red Rock Bicycle down here, Denise Purdue, who owns a bike company, a bike touring company, and a few other people. John's wife, Kai, was on there, and I'm not sure who else, but it was just a bunch of concerned cyclists, and it started with a project. And for me, the most successful things that I've seen happen in St. George, they start with concerned citizens who see a problem and they come forward. You know, talk about tactical urbanism, Aaron. I feel like that is often the thing that leads us to do our best work, because the citizens get out there and they say, you know what, we got a problem, we've got to do something about it. That's basically what happened with the Southern Utah Bicycle Alliance formation. So there was a problem where UDOT had come in on SR 18 and just unknowingly put the rumble strips right where the cyclists needed to ride. And so what happened that I was so impressed with the Southern Utah Bicycle Alliance is, instead of just throwing a fit and coming in and saying, you know, you screwed up our road, they really went to work building relationships. And by the time I joined the alliance, the relationships were already there, with the cities, with the county, with UDOT, with, you know, anybody who played a part in making those decisions or making things happen. The alliance had already developed these really great relationships. And instead of just showing up at somebody's office, I mean, they went the extra step and took them to lunch, or even better, took them on a walk or took them on a bike ride and said, you know, let's go check this out together and see what we can do. So I see that as being probably the most important thing that's happened in St. George, was the starting of the building of that those relationships. And then beyond that, other organizations have started to join in. So they were kind of the pioneers. In about 2015, was doing a school project, and I decided to do something that was similar to what the Bicycle Collective does. So through that project, I ended up forming kind of a Bicycle Collective type group down here, and then eventually connecting with the Bicycle Collective from Salt Lake City. And we now have a Bicycle Collective in St. George. But what I see is that we're gradually building organizations like this, Southern Utah Bicycle Alliance, then the Bicycle Collective, you know, and other organizations that are interested in active transportation, that are interested in being part of that space. And then beyond just building those organizations, it's really building the relationships with them. One organization that jumped in this last year in St. George is a PTA and a neighborhood in Bloomington Hills. They had a missing link. They had a stretch of roadway where kids just absolutely could not walk or bike. And they'd been dealing with it for years, and nobody wanted to send their kids to school walking or biking because there was this one stretch. Well, we knew it was there as a city, but it just wasn't high on the priority list. And so their neighborhood got together, really organized by Kai Nordfelt, who is currently the president of Southern Utah Bicycle Alliance. And he started polling the neighbors and gathered a bunch of information and gathered information about, funding opportunities that were out there. And by the time they came to city council and the mayor with, this ask, they'd already gathered a bunch of information, and we already knew, like, the neighbors are on board. Here's all the people who will let their kids ride their bike to school if you'll just fix this one section. So I view that as, a form of tactical urbanism that really works well. And then, to Becca's point of human limits on how much the staff can accomplish, I mean, amen to that, because I've watched it now that I've been part of the city. And I just think that when concerned citizens get involved, it makes all the difference. And when that communication and that relationship building happens, then that's really when you see the magic, because the staff feels supported. They know what the residents really want. And that's when I see projects really moving forward in a positive way. And then the other thing that I've seen with city government is I'm the only cyclist on our city government, like in our city council and mayor, but it doesn't matter because we get them out on a bike or we get them out walking, and they see it. And so I feel like that is one of the greatest tools, is don't just talk about it at City Hall, get out on your bike with them, supply a bike for them, take them on a walk, and then the projects start to move forward.
Great, thank you. And Adan, you want to take us home?
Yeah, I don't know that I have much to say because everyone has already talked about it. So I guess I do want to just say a little bit, some recommendations for people on the government side, for transportation officials alike. We tend to believe that we, invest in a lot of resources to conduct community outreach. I know UDOT, for example, spends a lot of money on community outreach, and they do, one of the best jobs in terms of outreach that I've ever seen in the industry, hands down. And I think a lot of entities, including Salt Lake City, are following suit. And when I was there, I know we were going above and beyond in terms within the capabilities that we had. And then COVID last year made it extremely difficult for us to really reach out to people in a way that was equitable and that was, heartfelt, just because of the restrictions we had in place. But one thing that I will just, mention for everyone is that if we're not reaching out deliberatively to these advocacy groups, if we're not bringing them to the table during the planning stages of these projects, during the investment allocation for our general budgets, if we're not bringing them to the table early on, we're really doing a disservice to our communities, because they have one of that better pulse in terms of the community, in terms of needs for active transportation needs, and they are our greatest allies. They are our greatest advocates. If we ever go into an open house, or if we ever go back to the typical boring open house format, we are definitely going to need their support to sort of help us balance that spectrum when we get blasted from people saying, do not take my parking away. Cars were here before bikes, therefore no bikes on my road, kind of thing. They are our greatest advocates to help us push and balance that spectrum, so that we can then implement the kinds of things that we're doing. So if we're not inviting them to the table now, we're definitely doing a disservice to ourselves, simply because they are our greatest advocates. And then fourth, a piece of advice for the advocacy group, which a lot of times we tend to be confused with activists, and those two terms are completely different. And so a piece of advice for the advocates, and I think it's already been brought out before, having conversations that are civil, that are respectful, that are conducive to progress, productive, is literally the best, if not the only way to get anything done. The minute you become, and it's, I understand it too, because the wheels of government move rather slowly, right? And I can see the frustration. Even internal staff, sometimes we, working in this arena, we sort of get frustrated as well, right? Budgets get cut, different priorities get allocated, but really, by the time some of these decisions are being made, it's a little too late for us to do anything about it. We cannot lobby our own government officials. We cannot go to the city council. We cannot go to the mayor and say, hey, so-and-so didn't like this. Can we please get more money for this? We cannot do that. Once we're given our orders, the budgets are allocated, we just go and get it done. So in going back again to involving these groups early on, because they are the voice of reason, they are the ones that will need to advocate on our behalf, right? And so for the advocates to expect government or transportation officials to go out and search for funding or do any, we are not, our agencies are not structured in a way in which is conducive for us to go and do that ourselves. If the public expects that, then they need to go out and, like Aaron just talked about, showing up is 80% of the battle. It's I can't agree any more than that, because again, by the time we get our budgets and our orders, it's a little too late for us to change a lot of that thing. So.
Great, thank you. These have been all really great thoughts. Now we just want to open it up for questions that people might have. One question I do see, I don't know if any of you would know the answer to this, but how is the 600, 700 North, or somebody else commented, corridor reconstruction project looking? Does anybody? Maybe not, okay.
So I think that this is a Salt Lake City project, and I'm not the project manager on that project, so I can't speak to any of the details. There is, but this is a good example. There's actually not a reconstruction project yet on 6 and 700 North. There has been a design process, public outreach around possible design changes, but there's not funding yet to implement on a broad scale the project of a reconstruction project. And this speaks to the importance of having advocate attention to projects at the point that they are in that very conceptual design phase, and then having patience as we have a conceptual design and some ideas as to what might be able to happen there, and then there will be a time in which we're seeking funding. And part of my role, I'm actually no longer the bicycle pedestrian coordinator for the city. Instead, I have shifted into doing much more with strategic planning and initiating projects, and part of initiating projects is getting the funding to make them happen. So I have been working pretty hard recently on trying to partner up the 6 and 700 North reconstruction project with potential funding sources so that we can have enough money to really put in place some of the great designs that the community has been supporting us in developing.
Great. Another question that came up is, when is the best, easiest time to speak up to make changes when we see a project is starting, or is it too late by then?
I saw that. I think that it's like planting a tree, right? So the best time to plant a tree was always 20 years ago, and the next best time is today. So I feel like that is how it is with these projects. As soon as you know, if you know way before the project's even going to start, if you know that there's going to be a problem that you foresee, then heavens, yes, like speak up as soon as you possibly can, because I've seen a lot of these projects where, of course, after the fact, people are saying, well, if only, and it just wasn't addressed in time. So always the sooner is better. And then if I can really quick, now I can't see it, but there was a question from Alex, I think Cragen, about I feel like biracial people of color communities are left out of these conversations, and our organizations that other advocacy government groups work with to ensure that community leaders and public are informed about projects and initiatives. I would love to see a follow-up after this on that exact question, because that's something we're really working hard on in St. George right now, and I'd love some help with it. It's challenging. We've tried to reach out through churches. We've tried, there's all these different community organizations that we've tried to reach out and say, hey, we're developing a new active transportation plan, or we're developing a new downtown general plan, and we'd love your input, but we're not getting a lot of response on that. And I would love to hear if anybody has done that well, and so that we can follow your lead.
And one thing I'm also going to add is,
okay, go on.
I'm just going to add something quickly too. It's one thing is, you get to know about a project and you get involved, right? And then we all want like all kinds of bicycle boulevards or protected bike lanes, right? And they all sound like great ideas that make sense. But one thing that's often left out of the conversation is that ongoing future maintenance that facilities like that require. And that's, projects have the right resources to get them built the first time, but that conversation for that forever on maintenance of having to purchase equipment or hiring staff to bring mini snow plows, sweepers, or all kinds of amenities that those new facilities will need forever on. Those never get talked about. Those resources are never allocated in time, and that's usually a lot of the decision making that goes into implementing some of these. Nobody wants to build a protected bike lane that's covered in snow 5-6 months out of the year, right? And so the conversation all of a sudden becomes now, okay, if we build it, are we going to be able to maintain it? Right? And a lot of our minds are, well, it makes no sense. We're maintaining roads already. But again, like Erin talked about, it's a real challenge to undo decades upon decades of a car-centric transportation system with the very, very small budgets that are allocated towards active transportation. And so until that mentality shifts in terms of priorities, we'll continue to have these sort of these projects in which we're not seeing the types of facilities that we all wish we had, right? And so that conversation is really at a higher level in terms of maintenance priorities, which are now competing with, library service, police services, parks. You now have to, it's a lot more holistic. So it's not so much knowing when these projects get, implemented or when they start planning them. It's more about that maintenance budgeting aspect of things.
Great. These are all great thoughts. I really appreciate you all sharing this. Now we are going to move into our workshop sessions. In the chat, we've dropped your assigned workshop letter or what room you're going to go into. If you can look at that, then head over to the left-hand side menu and select workshops, then find your workshop letter. If you have trouble, feel free to send us a message in the chat or in the lobby chat area. After we have finished the workshop session, it's hard to say, we will end this session back on the main stage to round up what we have discussed. Let us know if you have any questions or you're having trouble.
Are we supposed to be dropping into those? Do you guys know?
Yeah, if you would like to, you guys can drop into those as well. And you can just kind of pick where, or I guess there's a setup for us.
We don't get told that we're no longer broadcasting, but I guess we're no longer broadcasting.